Young black man helps woman in distress change a tire, but the next day a police car shows up at his door, and what happens is absurd. Jessica Miller was in her apartment, the soft glow of the late afternoon filtering through the curtains, creating an almost cozy atmosphere that her restless heart couldn't appreciate. Sitting at the kitchen table, her gaze drifted to the photo of her daughter, Emily, taped to the wall. The image captured a moment of pure happiness, where mother and daughter were smiling together on a sunny day at the park. That smile, however, felt so distant now. The glow of her cell phone diverted Jessica's attention from the photo. It was a call from her lawyer, and anxiety settled deep in her chest. With a slight tremor in her hand, she answered, "Hello?" Her voice came out a bit louder than she intended. "Jessica, it's me, Tom. We need to talk about the custody hearing next week," said the lawyer, his voice steady but laced with an empathy that Jessica recognized. "Sure. What do I need to know?" Jessica tried to sound calm, but worry was evident in her tone. "We'll need to prepare some documents, and primarily you have to be ready to answer tough questions. The situation isn't easy, and your ex-husband, well, he's not going to make it any easier," he said, and Jessica felt the weight of his words settle in the pit of her stomach. "I understand," Jessica replied, swallowing hard. "I'll do whatever it takes." The conversation continued, but Jessica's mind wandered, fixating on the image of her daughter. "I just want to do what's best for her," she murmured almost absently. After hanging up, a whirlwind of emotions enveloped her. The day dragged on and she found herself at work, trying to distract herself with daily tasks. But the anxious anticipation of the hearing consumed her. During a coffee break, her colleague Maria approached. "Hey, Jessica, you seem distant. Is everything okay?" Jessica forced a smile, trying to hide her vulnerability. "Just a bit of stress, you know how it is," she replied, stirring her cup and watching the liquid swirl. Maria looked at her with concern. "You need to take care of yourself. This custody battle for Emily isn't easy and you can't let it consume you. Have you thought about talking to someone?" "Actually, I'm too busy to think about therapy," Jessica deflected, trying to change the subject. "How are things with your son?" "He's doing well, but I want you to know I'm here if you need anything," Maria insisted, but Jessica shook her head, grateful yet unwilling to open up. The day dragged on, and at the end of her shift, Jessica checked her messages and found one from Jamal, a young man she had met at a community event. "Hi, Jessica. I just wanted to thank you again for your support at the last meeting. It meant a lot to me." A smile involuntarily spread across her face. Jamal had a way of brightening her day, even though she barely knew him. Jessica quickly replied, "Hi, Jamal. I'm glad you enjoyed it. You're doing great work in the community. Keep it up." As she sent the message, she realized that even amidst her chaos, Jamal had become a source of strength for her. It was curious how, in the midst of her own storm, she could connect with someone else who was also fighting. This thought sparked a small thread of hope within her. Returning home, Jessica looked once more at the photo of Emily. "I will fight for you, my little one," she promised herself, feeling a wave of determination swell inside her. "Nothing will bring me down." With that, she prepared to face whatever came next, not just for her daughter, but for herself as well. Jamal Carter sat in one of the plastic chairs at the entrepreneurship workshop, his eyes glued to the mentor speaking passionately and determinedly. The former mechanic who had overcome numerous social barriers shared his journey, and each word resonated deeply within Jamal. He felt the weight of unfulfilled dreams, but with every phrase, a new spark ignited inside him. The mentor, a middle-aged man with a welcoming smile, captivated the audience with stories of failures and successes, always emphasizing the importance of persistence. "Remember, young people," he said, gesturing enthusiastically, "failure is not the opposite of success. Every challenge you face is an opportunity to learn and grow." Before we continue with this emotional story, be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories. And let us know what city you're watching this video from in the comments. Jamal took fervent notes, his pen racing across the paper, capturing every valuable tip. He dreamed of opening his own shop, but the reality surrounding him was a constant reminder of the obstacles to overcome. The police's distrust, the disapproving looks, and the prejudice permeating his community left him feeling insecure. But in that moment, surrounded by other young people with similar aspirations, he felt he was in the right place. When the workshop ended, Jamal stood up, energized. He could hardly wait to put into practice everything he had learned. However, as he exited the building, reality hit him like a bucket of cold water. A police officer awaited him outside, his suspicious gaze piercing. Jamal felt his stomach churn, but he took a deep breath and decided not to let fear take over. "Hey, you," the officer called, walking towards him. "What are you doing here?" "I'm heading home, sir," Jamal replied, trying to keep his voice calm, even though nerves pulsed through his veins. "I just left an entrepreneurship workshop." The officer crossed his arms, sizing him up with a critical look. "Workshop, huh? And you think that's enough to avoid trouble? You know this area isn't exactly safe, right?" "Yes, sir, but I'm trying to change that. I'm looking to open my own shop," Jamal said, determination starting to seep into his voice. He knew he had to assert himself. "I'm not a threat." The officer raised an eyebrow, but instead of responding, he turned and walked away, leaving Jamal with a mix of relief and frustration. He looked up at the sky, as if searching for answers in the clouds. What more did he need to do to be seen as someone with potential and not a suspect? When he got home, Jamal found his younger brother, Malik, sitting on the couch playing video games. The boy smiled at him, but Jamal's worried expression didn't go unnoticed. "Hey bro, how was the workshop?" Malik asked, turning off the console. "It was great," Jamal replied, trying to smile. "I learned a lot. I'm thinking about how I can start working on my business plan for the shop." "That's amazing. You can do it, right?" Malik said, admiration evident in his voice. "You've always talked about wanting to do this." "Yeah, but you know how hard it is. Sometimes I wonder if it's worth it," Jamal admitted, letting his insecurity show. "The police don't help, and people only see the color of my skin." "Forget that, Jamal. You're the best mechanic I know. If you don't believe in yourself, who will?" Malik replied, full of enthusiasm. "Just go for it. I'll help you." Jamal's heart warmed at his brother's words. He knew he needed support, but also courage. The journey would be long and full of challenges, but at that moment he decided he wouldn't give up. Jamal promised himself that he would give everything he had to turn his dreams into reality, not just for himself, but also for Malik and for the community that desperately needed hope. Detective Michael Evans sat at his desk, surrounded by stacks of files and reports. The dim light of the office illuminated his tired face as he reviewed the case of Jamal Carter. The young man's name intrigued him, but what truly struck him were memories of his own youth, moments when, like Jamal, he had also been judged by his appearance. He remembered being a teenager, when the police's distrust followed him like a shadow, even when he was just walking through the streets of his neighborhood. "How many of my friends didn't go through this?" he thought, shaking his head in dismay. Evans closed his eyes for a moment, trying to shake off the fatigue. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the bustling street below. The frenetic movement of the city mirrored the constant struggle for survival and dignity of its inhabitants. He knew that the police, in many cases, failed to do their part. With a heavy heart, he decided he couldn't let Jamal's story become just another example of injustice. At his desk, a colleague, Detective Harris, entered without knocking. "Still working on that case, Evans? You know it's a waste of time. That kid is just another delinquent." Harris's disdainful statement made Evans's blood boil. "You don't know what you're talking about," Evans replied, his voice firm. "The kid has dreams, just like any of us. He's not a criminal. What you see in him is just the surface." Harris crossed his arms, looking scornful. "Do you really think this idealistic view will change anything? Reality is tougher than you imagine. It's better to stay out of cases like this." With a sigh, Evans turned back to the stack of documents. "I can't ignore what's happening. The police need to change. We need to change. And if I can do something for this kid, I will." In the following days, Evans decided to dig deeper. He began talking to residents in the community where Jamal lived, listening to their stories. What he discovered was surprising. In a small convenience store, an elderly lady, Mrs. Clara, greeted him with a smile. "You're here for Jamal, aren't you?" she asked, her eyes shining with a mix of concern and hope. "Yes, ma'am. What can you tell me about him?" Evans leaned in to listen. "Oh, that boy is a gem, always helping the neighbors, fixing things. He has a good heart, you know. He doesn't deserve what's happening to him." Evans took notes as Mrs. Clara continued. "He dreams of having his own shop. What he does with those cars is art. But unfortunately, the police don't see that. They only see a young black man on the streets." With each new conversation, Evans felt more convinced that something was wrong with this investigation. The stories of support and kindness he heard spoke of a Jamal who was much more than the label the police had imposed on him. In another conversation, a young man named Malik, a friend of Jamal, highlighted the injustices. The problem isn't Jamal, detective. The problem is how the police see us. If you're not lucky enough to be born in a good neighborhood, you're already a suspect. This isn't just about him. It's about all of us. With each testimony, Evans's vision became clearer. He was dealing with a system that had historically failed to protect and support the youth in the community. The weight of responsibility pressed on his shoulders, but he was determined to change this narrative. Upon returning to the precinct, he sat back down at his desk, this time with renewed energy. He began compiling information, organizing evidence in a way that would support Jamal's innocence. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was his superior. "Evans, you're getting too involved in this case. Be careful not to burn yourself. The last thing we need is trouble with the higher-ups," the captain warned. "Don't worry, Captain. I'm just doing my job. And my job is to seek the truth," Evans replied, resolute. Thus he prepared to navigate a path that could not only help Jamal, but perhaps also change how the police interacted with the community they were meant to protect. Evans's determination was becoming a flame that could illuminate the shadows of distrust and prejudice, one step at a time. The community center room was filled with a buzz of animated conversation as people settled in. Local activist Davi adjusted the microphone and looked out at the crowd gathered to discuss Jamal's situation. He felt nervous, but his passion for the cause drove him forward. At the back of the room, Jessica watched, concerned about the repercussions of her involvement but also feeling a spark of hope ignite in her chest. "Good evening, everyone," Davi began, his voice strong and filled with determination. "We're here today to support one of our own, Jamal Carter, a young man fighting against injustice and discrimination. He needs our help." Applause echoed through the room, and Jessica felt encouraged. She remembered the determined look on Jamal's face when they last spoke and how he opened up about his dreams. It was time to act, and she wanted to be part of the change. For those who don't know, Jamal is facing unfounded charges and needs legal support. But this is not just about him. This is a bigger problem affecting our entire community. Davy continued, gesturing to emphasize his words. "We need to come together and show that we will not accept this injustice." An elderly woman raised her hand. "Davy, how can we help? What's being done to defend Jamal?" Davy nodded, acknowledging the question. "We're organizing a fundraising campaign to cover Jamal's legal costs. We need donations, but we also need volunteers to spread the word and mobilize the community." Jessica gathered her courage and stood up. "I would like to offer my help. I can use my professional network to gain support and visibility for this cause. Together, we can make a significant difference." Hearing Jessica's words, a young man in the corner of the room interjected, "But this isn't just about Jamal. We need to talk about the injustices we all face every day. This is a systemic issue." "You're absolutely right," Davi agreed. "And that's why we need to hear everyone's voices. Let's open the floor for everyone to share their experiences. Who would like to start?" The residents began sharing stories of discrimination they had experienced or witnessed. A middle-aged man stood up and said, "I've been stopped by the police just for being out on the street at night. I'm not doing anything wrong, but the color of my skin feels like a sign that says suspicious." Jessica felt a lump in her throat. Each account echoed the struggles she herself had faced, albeit in a different context. She realized that Jamal's difficulties weren't just his. They reflected the struggles of the entire community. A younger woman, tears in her eyes, stood up. "I've faced that too. My brother was wrongfully arrested, and all we got was a lawyer who seemed more interested in his fee than in the truth. It's time to stop being silent." The energy in the room increased with each new story, and Jessica felt increasingly inspired. Davi, sensing the growing motivation, said, "Let's create a support group for Jamal. If each of us brings a friend or family member, we can amplify our strength and reach more people." Hearing this, an elderly man raised his hand. "What if we hold a vigil in front of the police station? A peaceful act to show that we are united and will no longer accept this injustice." The room erupted in applause, and the idea quickly gained momentum. "Yes, let's do it. We need to show that we are a strong and united community." The meeting continued, and the atmosphere was charged with determination. Jessica felt like she was part of something bigger, a movement that could bring about change. As the gathering came to a close, people embraced, exchanged contacts, and promised to meet again. As Jessica was leaving, Davy approached her. "Thank you for your courage, Jessica. We need more voices like yours." She smiled, feeling stronger than ever. "Let's do this together. Jamal isn't alone." In that moment, Jessica realized that Jamal's fight for justice had also become her fight. The community was awakening and change was on the horizon. Jessica Miller was nervous as she prepared for the charity event in Bloomfield Hills. The atmosphere in the venue was luxurious and intimidating, with sparkling chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling and elegantly decorated tables. The contrast with her everyday life was stark, and she felt out of place, as if she were in a parallel universe. Looking in the mirror, she adjusted her dress and took a deep breath, trying to shake off the anxiety that had been with her since the custody hearing. "You're going to crush it, Jess," her friend who was accompanying her said. "Your speech is going to inspire so many people." "I hope so," Jessica replied, forcing a smile. Deep down, she was more concerned about her personal struggle and the custody of Emily than about the event itself. The longing for her daughter consumed her, and the uncertainty about the future left her restless. As soon as she entered the hall, Jessica was greeted by familiar and unfamiliar faces. She felt a little more at ease upon seeing some people from her work, but still the feeling of being in a place that didn't belong to her was overwhelming. The event began, and Jessica prepared for her speech. As she was introduced, she stepped onto the stage and looked out at the audience, trying to ignore her nerves. "Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Miller, and I'm here to share my story and the struggle for custody of my daughter, Emily," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Being a mother is one of the greatest challenges I've ever faced, especially in an environment that often doesn't value my voice." As she spoke, Jessica noticed a familiar face in the crowd. It was Jamal Carter, her acquaintance from the entrepreneurship workshop. He was standing a bit farther back, but his eyes were fixed on her, filled with support. His presence brought her some comfort, and she decided to continue. "I believe that we all have the right to be heard and to fight for our dreams," she said with more conviction. "And like me, many young people face barriers that seem insurmountable. We need to come together to change this." Applauded at the end of her speech, Jessica descended from the stage with a mix of relief and pride. She had no idea Jamal was there, but his presence gave her a glimmer of hope. As she approached him, she felt a tension in the air. "You were amazing up there," Jamal commented, a shy smile spreading across his face. "It's great to see someone speaking so openly about their struggles." "Thank you, Jamal. I was nervous, but I needed to speak," Jessica replied, trying to keep the conversation light while feeling the weight of the reality they both faced. "I get it. Sometimes it feels like we're alone in this fight, but it's important to remember we're not," he said, the seriousness of his voice touching her. "You really highlighted the need for support in our community." Jessica hesitated, aware that the conversation could quickly become uncomfortable. I don't know if I can make much of a difference alone," she admitted, looking at the ground. "You're already making a difference, Jessica. Just by speaking the truth, you inspire others to do the same," he replied, his sincere gaze conveying an empathy that Jessica hadn't expected. "I just wish more people would listen and join us." The silence between them was loaded with meaning. Jessica felt a connection forming, something that transcended their differences. "And you?" she asked, looking for a new angle in the conversation. "What are you working on?" "I'm trying to open my own auto repair shop, but it's been a challenge. The police see me more as a suspect than a dreamer," Jamal said, his voice heavy with frustration. "That's awful. I can't imagine what it must be like to face that every day," Jessica murmured, her empathy growing within her. "It's not easy, but I have hope. And honestly, your fight inspires me to keep going," Jamal said, his eyes shining with determination. Jessica felt touched. It was easy to see the difficulties they both faced, but there was also an undeniable strength in what they were trying to build. And in that moment of connection, a surge prompted her to take a step forward. "You know, maybe we can help each other. I have some contacts that might be useful for you." "That would be amazing." "Seriously, Jessica, thank you for this," Jamal said, gratitude shining in his eyes. The atmosphere around them shifted, and the initial tension transformed into a genuine exchange of support. As the conversation began to flow, Jessica realized she wasn't just connecting worlds. She was also building a bridge of understanding between their lives. The event, which had once felt like merely an obligation, was now turning into a moment of hope and solidarity. Jessica and Jamal were in a corner of the elegant hall where the charity event was taking place. Bright lights cast a soft glow over the faces of people mingling, laughing and chatting. However, for them, the outside world seemed to fade away. Both were immersed in their own realities, but there was something magical in the air, a connection that bound them together. With a shy smile, Jessica began to open her heart to Jamal. "You know, I never thought I'd be here talking about my life, about how everything can be so tough sometimes. The fight for custody of my daughter, it feels like a battlefield. I feel so vulnerable," she confessed, looking down, avoiding Jamal's intense gaze. "I understand, Jessica. It's tough. We always try to do our best, but it feels like the world is against us, doesn't it?" Jamal replied, his tone heavy with empathy. He remembered the nights he dreamed of opening his shop, but the harsh realities of life always seemed like an insurmountable barrier. Jessica lifted her gaze, now more confident. "And you? How are you dealing with everything? I saw how you spoke at the workshop, your passion, it's inspiring." "It's complicated," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I've always dreamed of having my own shop, but the distrust from the police and the strange looks from people, it makes me question if it's worth it. Sometimes I think maybe I should just give up." "Don't give up," she said, her voice firm. "You have a dream, and I also have to fight for mine. It's not easy, but that's what we have to do. Fight for our kids, for our dreams." The connection between them grew stronger. Jamal felt that, despite their different lives, there was a profound understanding, a recognition of the struggles they both faced. "You know, Jessica, sometimes I look to the future and only see obstacles, but hearing you talk about your daughter, it makes me want to fight even more. I want my brother to have a better future. I want him to have opportunities. You will make it, Jamal, and you're not alone in this. I want to help. I have some ideas that might be useful for you. I believe we can do something together. You're not just fighting for yourself, but for the whole community," Jessica said, her heart racing at the thought of a partnership. "Would you really do that for me?" Jamal asked, surprised. He hadn't expected such generosity. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to thank me. That's what we do, right? We help each other. That's the only way to truly change things," she replied, a smile lighting up her face. "I work with an organization that supports entrepreneurs. We can talk about how to build a plan for your shop." Jamal smiled, feeling a wave of hope. "That would be incredible. I never thought someone like you would care so much. I'm no different from you, Jamal. We all have our struggles. And if we don't come together, how can we expect the world to change?" Jessica said, leaning in closer as if sharing a secret. They continued to talk, exchanging ideas and dreams, while the environment around them became a distant blur. Every word they shared was a step toward a new understanding, a new bond. The hug they exchanged at the end of that conversation wasn't just a gesture of affection, it was a silent promise of mutual support. "I never thought I'd find someone who understands what I'm going through so well. Thank you for listening," Jamal said, his eyes shining with gratitude. "And I thank you for sharing your story with me. Let's do this together," Jessica replied, feeling that in that moment something had changed for both of them. They were no longer just a dreamer mechanic and a fighting mother. They were allies on a journey that could transform not only their lives, but also the lives of many around them. Jamal Carter sat at the table in the community library, surrounded by sheets of paper and notes. The smell of fresh coffee permeated the air as he tried to compose his business plan for the auto shop he had always dreamed of opening. He had become an active member of the community. The support he had received in recent weeks motivated him to turn his dream into reality. The idea of having a space where he could not only work, but also offer opportunities to other young people in his neighborhood excited him. As he wrote, his thoughts traveled back to the conversations he had with Jessica. She had proven to be a source of inspiration, not only for the strength with which she faced her personal battles, but also for her dedication to helping others. He remembered their last meeting when she told him, "If you don't fight for your dreams, who will?" Those words echoed in his mind, urging him to keep going. The next day, Jessica Miller woke up with new determination. After her heartfelt conversation with Jamal, she felt motivated to use her position to make a difference. As she prepared for work, she decided it was time to take action. "If I can help one person, why not several?" she thought. She picked up her phone and began reaching out to former colleagues and local business people, seeking resources that could benefit young entrepreneurs like Jamal. At the office, Jessica met with a group of colleagues to discuss a social responsibility project they were developing. "I know many of you have valuable connections in the community," she began, her eyes shining. "I met a young man named Jamal who has an incredible dream: to open his own auto shop. He needs guidance and, more importantly, financial support." One of her colleagues, Tom, frowned. "Jessica, you know the situation in our city is complicated. How do you think we can help a young man facing so many obstacles?" "We need to be the change we want to see," Jessica replied firmly. "Jamal is talented and has a vision. If we join forces, we can help him achieve his goals. Imagine how many young people he could inspire if he succeeds." Jessica's words made an impact. Colleagues began discussing ideas, and soon they were drafting a plan to organize a fundraising event. The energy in the room was palpable, and Jessica felt that she was starting to form a support network that could truly make a difference. Meanwhile, Jamal was at a community meeting where residents were discussing the future of their neighborhood. He felt a wave of excitement as he shared his dream with others. "I want to create a space where everyone can learn and grow, a place where young people like me can learn about mechanics and even start their own businesses," he said, his voice full of passion. "That's amazing, Jamal," exclaimed a woman in the audience. "You should definitely do it. The community needs more people like you." "Yes, and I'm here to help in any way I can," added a middle-aged man who introduced himself as a local businessman. "If you need advice on handling finances, I'm at your disposal." After the meeting, Jamal felt rejuvenated. He realized he wasn't alone in his struggle. The community was beginning to rally around his dream, and that gave him a new sense of hope. As he walked home, he remembered what Jessica had said about fighting for your dreams. He didn't just want to open a shop, he wanted to build a legacy. That night, Jamal decided to send Jessica a message expressing his gratitude. "Hey Jessica, I wanted to thank you for everything you're doing. Today at the meeting, I felt like I can really make a difference. I'm excited to work on this business plan." Jessica quickly replied, "Jamal, you are the change we all need. I'm here to help in any way necessary. Let's turn this dream into reality together." As the days passed, the connection between Jessica and Jamal grew stronger. They met frequently to discuss plans, exchange ideas, and even dream about the future. Jamal was starting to see Jessica not just as an ally, but as a friend, and Jessica, in turn, began to recognize the strength and potential that Jamal represented, not just for himself but for the entire community. On a sunny morning, as they prepared for a new fundraising meeting, Jamal and Jessica exchanged a look that said it all. Together, they were ready to face the challenges ahead, determined to build a brighter future for themselves and their community. The city pulsed with a palpable tension and the air felt heavier than usual. Jamal sat in his kitchen, the dim light from the hanging lamp illuminating his worried face. He stared at his phone, Jessica's message still fresh in his mind. It was a message of support, but the reality surrounding him was different. The police were watching him again, and the weight of suspicion felt suffocating. He got up and walked to the window, watching the silent street. The echoes of laughter and distant conversations reminded him that life went on, but he felt trapped in a bubble of anxiety. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Detective Michael Evans was reviewing notes from his latest case. He had received orders from higher-ups to investigate Jamal, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with the police's approach. Looking out the window of his office, he saw young people playing ball in the street, laughing and carefree. Those were the same kids he had once been, and the injustice many faced struck him deeply. "Why can't they see what I see?" he murmured to himself, feeling a knot form in his stomach. The next day, the tension escalated. A group of activists gathered in front of the police station to protest against discriminatory practices. Jessica, who arrived at the scene motivated by the need to support Jamal, watched the unfolding scene with a mix of hope and fear. She knew that the struggle was bigger than just one individual case. It was a cry for justice and dignity for all. As she mingled with the residents, one of the leaders of the protest, a man with a commanding voice and strong presence, began to speak. "Today we are here to say that we will no longer accept injustices. Jamal is a young man with dreams, and he should not be treated like a criminal before being judged." The crowd erupted in applause, and Jessica felt her heart race. It was a call to action, and she knew she needed to do more. Meanwhile, Evans, pressured by his superiors, found himself at a crossroads. He recalled a conversation he had with a colleague at the precinct who had advised him to stay away from cases like Jamal's. "You can't get emotionally involved, Evans. That's not your job," his colleague had said, but he couldn't ignore the truth that pulsed within him. "What if I'm wrong? What if Jamal's truth matters more than the orders I've received?" After reflecting, Evans decided to go into the community and listen to the stories. He spoke with residents, some friends of Jamal, who shared accounts of his kindness and determination. "He just wants to open a shop, detective. He's not a criminal," said a woman with tears in her eyes. "He's always helped others. Why is the police after him?" "I want to understand," Evans replied, his voice heavy with sincerity. "They say people can change, but maybe change starts with me. I need to see the reality of what's happening here." That night, the community gathered again, and Jessica, now more confident, decided to speak up. She was a woman going through a divorce, fighting for her daughter, but the passion for justice propelled her forward. "We're not just fighting for Jamal. We're fighting for all of us. What happened to him could happen to any one of us. We need to unite and show that we won't accept this any longer." Her words echoed in the room, and the crowd responded with applause and shouts of support. When the meeting ended, Jessica felt different. The adrenaline of fighting for justice enveloped her, while the uncertainty of the future loomed over her. As she walked home, she couldn't help but think about the effect her words had on the people. At the same time, Evans, more determined than ever, knew he needed to act. He could no longer ignore what was right in front of him. The change he wanted to see in the world began with him. That night, the fate of Jamal and the community's struggle were more intertwined than ever. Empathy was forming, and the fight for justice was just beginning. Jamal walked into the courtroom with a racing heart. The atmosphere was oppressive, surrounded by unfamiliar faces and curious gazes that seemed to weigh him down even more. He sat in the chair, observing the faces around him, including those from his community who had come to support him. The hushed voices and the tension in the air were palpable. He felt the pressure in his chest, but also the determination to prove his innocence. The judge, a middle-aged man with a stern expression, entered and took his seat at the bench. With a bang of his gavel, he called for silence. "We are here to hear the case against Jamal Carter. The prosecution will present its evidence," he announced, his voice resonating through the courtroom. An arrogant prosecutor stood up, adjusting his tie. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here to discuss the wrongdoing committed by this young man, who was found at the scene of a crime. What we have here is a pattern of behavior that cannot be ignored," he said, casting a disdainful glance at Jamal. Jamal, feeling the injustice in the prosecutor's words, took a deep breath. He needed to keep his head held high. The prosecution continued, presenting testimonies that twisted the truth. He remembered Jessica's words, always encouraging him not to be shaken. "The truth always prevails," she would say. Looking out the window, he saw the familiar faces of his friends and supporters, which gave him strength. When it was his turn to testify, Jamal stood up and walked to the witness stand. The judge looked at him seriously. "Jamal Carter, are you aware of the charges against you?" "Yes, Your Honor, I am," Jamal replied, his voice steady, although his knees trembled. "But I am innocent. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time." The prosecutor interrupted, standing up to question him. "Do you really expect us to believe that you weren't involved in any illegal activities? The police found you in an area known for drug trafficking. What were you doing there?" Jamal looked the prosecutor in the eye, refusing to be intimidated. "I was there to help a friend. He was having trouble with his car, and I offered assistance. That's all," he said, his voice rising in intensity. "The color of my skin and the place I grew up do not define who I am. I am a young man who dreams of having my own auto repair shop. I am not a criminal." The jury seemed attentive, and Jamal felt he had captured their interest. The judge nodded in approval, allowing Jamal to continue. He remembered the community meeting, the stories shared, and the unwavering support he received. "My community stands with me. Everyone here knows who I am," he asserted, looking at the familiar faces in the room. "We need to hear more about this," the judge interrupted, and then Detective Michael Evans stood up. He approached the bench and requested the floor. "Your Honor, I would like to present new evidence that could clarify the situation." All eyes turned to Evans, who had decided to swim against the tide. He began to lay out the facts that had been overlooked. "After further investigation, I found that Jamal was trying to help a friend who had an accident. He was not involved in any criminal activity. I spoke with residents in the area who confirmed this." The prosecutor looked visibly irritated, but Jamal felt a wave of hope. He knew the truth was beginning to come to light. People are afraid to speak the truth, but this community is here to support Jamal. He is an example of perseverance and determination. Evans continued, gesturing to the audience. Jessica, sitting in the front row, felt tears welling in her eyes. Jamal's struggle was also hers. She stood up, unable to contain her emotion. I am a witness to Jamal's character. He not only dreams but fights for his dreams. He deserves a chance, she said, her voice echoing in the room. The judge looked at the jury and with a wave of his hand called for silence again. Thank you for your statement, Jessica Miller. Now let's proceed with the deliberations. The moment of tension hung in the air. Jamal waited, his heart beating to the rhythm of uncertainty. Finally, the judge announced the verdict. After reviewing all the evidence presented and the statements from Detective Evans, I declare that Jamal Carter is innocent of the charges. A shout of relief spread through the room. The jury stood, many members with tears in their eyes. Jamal couldn't believe it. He looked at Jessica, who was radiant, and at the community that had supported him unconditionally. The victory was not just his but belonged to all who believed in him. Jamal felt the emotion wash over him. He raised his arms in celebration as applause echoed around him. The fight was not over, but in that moment, the truth had finally triumphed. After the resounding victory in court, the sun shone on the city in a new light. Jessica Miller, now a fervent advocate for civil rights, felt more motivated than ever. In her home, surrounded by piles of documents and flyers, she spoke on the phone, her voice filled with determination. Yes, I understand it's a challenge, but we have to promote this change in the police. We cannot let injustice prevail, she said, jotting down some ideas. We need a meeting with community and police leaders. They need to hear our voices, not just in protests, but in dialogue at the table. It was a new chapter in Jessica's life, one that made her feel alive and purposeful. She knew the fight didn't end with Jamal's acquittal. On the contrary, it was just the beginning. With each conversation she had, she felt she was shaping a more just future for her daughter, Emily, and for all the young people in the community. Meanwhile, Jamal Carter was in his new workshop, a dream come true that he could hardly believe. The smell of motor oil and the sound of tools echoed around him, creating a symphony of hard work and dedication. He was organizing the shelves when Jessica walked in, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "Jamal, this place is amazing!" she exclaimed, looking around. "You really made this happen." "Thank you, Jessica," Jamal replied, his smile wide. "I still have a lot to learn, but I'm excited. I'm thinking of starting a training program for young mechanics. I want to pass on what I've learned." "That's a fantastic idea," Jessica said, filled with admiration. "We can hold a fundraising event to help finance it. The community is willing to support you." They began planning, discussing how they could raise funds and involve the community. The idea of joining forces for a common purpose excited both of them. As they talked about the details, Jamal looked at Jessica with a curious expression. "Have you ever stopped to think about how our lives have changed?" he asked. "Just a few months ago we were in such different situations. And now, we're here, fighting for something bigger." "It's true," she replied, reflecting on the challenges they had faced. "And that's what inspires me. We need to ensure that others don't go through what we went through." The fight for justice is ongoing. Just when the planning seemed to be on the right track, an unexpected moment occurred. Jamal's mentor, the former mechanic who had helped him get on his feet, walked into the workshop with a serious expression. He looked at both of them, taking a deep breath before he spoke. "Jamal, Jessica, I need you to know something. It's time for me to share a part of my life that I've never mentioned," he began hesitantly. Jamal and Jessica stopped, curious and concerned. "What's going on?" Jamal asked, his heart racing. "I am Jessica's father," he revealed, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "And the truth is, I've always known she was struggling. When I saw you, Jamal, I realized it was time to act, to correct the mistakes of the past." Jessica was in shock, her emotions swirling in a torrent. "Are you serious? Why didn't you tell me before? I didn't know how. I failed to be a father, and I didn't want to interfere in your life. But now, seeing the strength you both have, I realize it might be time to build a new relationship, one based on support and understanding," he explained, sincerity shining in his eyes. Jamal looked at Jessica, trying to grasp the depth of this revelation. "This changes everything," he murmured, feeling the weight of the situation. Jessica took a deep breath, trying to process the new dynamic. "If you want to be part of my life and Emily's, we need to start from scratch. I can't keep carrying the hurts of the past." The mentor nodded, emotional. "I understand. I'm here to help if you'll let me. I want to see you thrive." The conversation that followed was a mix of reluctance and hope, the beginning of a new family bond. As Jessica and Jamal prepared to face the future together, Now with a new member by their side, they knew they were ready to turn their struggles into something positive. With the support of the community, their own strengths, and now a new family, they were determined to make a difference. We've reached the end of this touching story. If you enjoyed it and want to see more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Right now there's a playlist of videos on your screen. If you want to keep watching these heartfelt stories, just click on it to start. And now tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and leave a like to support our work. Now a sincere question. Do you agree with what happened in the story? We'd love to hear your opinion. Until the next video,